couldn't, those don't fit in our. Okay. So let me know when we're gonna.
All right, well, we're about to start. We were just going to see if Jan or Tom was
Hey, can I send a big
wander in.
Sure.
That would be me.
Okay, well, how about we get started? We know that we're going to have Tom Krause coming in. We know Jen Yeckes from the county will be coming in. And so maybe what we'll do is just a quick welcome, do a little round of introductions. First, I wanted to say something about tonight's CAG meeting. So the last meeting was actually in May. And the reason we didn't meet in June was because, well, actually, the reason we didn't meet in June was that we were having a work session instead with just the CAG and EPA. And I thought on the day that was supposed to happen, we heard some very sudden and very tragic news that Les Sims, who was the project manager for the site for EPA before Linda for many years, had unexpectedly passed away the night before. And so we thought we would just take a minute and just have a moment. We haven't had a moment to just acknowledge that as the CAG and just take a minute and just have some thoughts or whatever you want to do, but just maybe take a minute or so. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so in terms of tonight's meeting, just a couple of notes. We didn't have the meeting in June and instead had a meeting just last week between the CAG, community members and EPA, just to sort of outside of a public meeting, just to air, sort of air things and have a direct conversation, and talked about a number of things. But one of the things we realized is that the two reports that we were going to discuss tonight that were going to be presented by EPA and the settling defendants aren't quite ready. They're still sort of being circulated, and they will be shared with the CAG, I think, in the next.
If there's still delayed a little bit,
Okay.
There's agency reviews. So.
Okay. So they're in the agency review process, and the next step is to share them with the CAG. Hopefully that will be very soon. In our August meeting, we'll focus on those two reports, and those reports are the potable water injection cessation report and the nested wells or North End study that's been going on. So hopefully that's what we'll focus on in August. But in the meantime, we had a CAG meeting and we weren't going to have Sarah Teschner, so we were lacking a technical person from EPA, and the CAG member suggested, and EPA thought this was a good idea, to really focus tonight's meeting on questions that have been coming up over the past year about effects from fracking or injection of fluids from oil and gas production in the Lowry vicinity. I guess we'll talk about tonight what we mean by vicinity. But so the idea, questions and concerns about could any of this affect what's happening at the Superfund site, and are there things that people should have on their radar or be concerned about? And because this, initially the CAG was convened by EPA and CDPHE about the management of the site. And so we've had updates about oil and gas issues, but we really haven't focused on them because it doesn't really so much affect EPA's management of the site. But we thought tonight was a really good opportunity just to open up the conversation and really just have an open conversation about these issues as they relate to the Superfund site. Not because imminent decisions are being made, I understand, but really just for information and sharing. So that's the focus of tonight's meeting. Why don't we first do a round of introductions, and then we can talk about how we want to structure the conversation. I have some thoughts about it. So I'm Ryan Bolton, and I'm the facilitator for this CAG from the Consensus Building Institute.
Go
ahead, Julie.
Go ahead, sorry.
I'm me. I'm Janine with the State Health Department.
Lee Gavon with the State Health Department.
Maggie Rashford, CAG, I'm from Murphy Creek.
John Barber, CAG member, traditions.
GD with Lowry Superfund Trust.
Lynn Robio Wagner, Tri-County Health Department.
Molly Smolin, CAG member, Murphy Creek.
Edith Hankey, Citizens Traditions.
Bonnie Rader, Sharon CAG, Thunderbird States.
Fifth grader CAG member, Thunderbird States.
Sean Hackett, State Health Department.
Stuart Ellsworth, engineering manager at the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission.
Diane Kosas, I'm the oil and gas specialist for Arapahoe County, and I handle all the energy-related applications, including the injection well application. And Bonnie asked me to give a sentence or so about what's going on in response to Senate Bill 181 at the county, and that is that we've started a process for looking at potential rules for oil and gas. Right now, all we have is our MOU. But Senate Bill 181 gives local governments more power. And, you wanted me to mention local governments. So the local governments have been meeting with each other. And I attended, about 3 weeks ago, I attended a meeting in Adams County that 6 other jurisdictions attended.
Great, thank you, it'd be good to hear.
I'm Jeff Baker. I'm the Arapahoe County Commissioner for this area. And I will mention that Diane also handles all of our solar applications as well. So she's been very, very busy with that because we've seen a lot more solar applications coming in as well. But so I try to attend these as often as I can. I don't know if I'm not part of the CAG, I guess.
Yes, you are, the county is, yeah.
That's right.
Dave Bullock with Sydney County, Denver. I'm the Denver's Lottery Project Manager.
I'm Leah Coy-House with City of Aurora.
Linda Kiefer, US EPA, Lowry Superfund Site Project Manager, among other things.
Other duties as assigned.
Yeah,
I'd just like to say that Congressman Crowe is trying to send his staff, everybody's in Washington right now. Congressman Crowe is very interested in this, and they're trying to look into the legislation that Joe Neguse has submitted. And they asked that since they couldn't get here tonight to say that the thing that they're concerned about investigating is whether or not this legislation would fit under the offsite plume, or is it just going to be supervised? And then I lost it. Hi, Tom.
Hi, sorry.
we can come right back to you.
Yeah, and then Representative Neguse was going to see that so at some point they'd like to come and brief us on what they would do.
Yeah, handouts so
Okay, that
far.
sounds great. So there are a couple people, Dawn, and I saw 2 others. Do you all want to introduce yourselves real quick?
Yes.
Sure, I'm Heather Lamboy, City of Aurora. Okay.
Don Langley, City of Aurora citizen.
Tom? Want to quickly introduce yourself?
Tom Kraus, co-chair, I apologize for being late.
This makes up for it, Bill.
Did you bring cookies?
Yes.
That sure does make up for it. Did your wife make them?
Okay, Tom.
We say that because Emily feeds us, so I trusted it was from her. Okay, so just a quick word about this agenda. Does anyone, basically the agenda is to talk about the oil and gas issues and questions that people have as they relate to Lowry, but I just wonder if there are any other items that people want to just put on the agenda real quick, even if it's announcements, and we'll get to them. Anything else that anyone wants to share, discuss, ask, to make sure we have time? Okay, great. Well, let's leave 15 minutes at the very end to talk about August. And Linda, is there anything more you want to say just about the schedule at this point and what folks should expect? expect in terms of those reports in the next month?
I mean, it's in flux, because there's a lot of people that have to look at them, and some of them aren't quite ready, even for EPA right now, so it's hard pressing. In the summer, there are a lot of people that take vacations, so it's hard for me to really nail down a date for you, so.
Okay, so at the end of the meeting, let's think about what could be backup. It seems to me, and Linda, tell me if I'm wrong, and Dave, that August, one possibility is that we talk about the reports, and that's what's on the agenda, the North End and the cessation reports. But it sounds like there's a good chance that that may not be ready to happen. And so maybe we should be thinking about Plan B. Okay. Okay. So let's reserve 15 minutes at the end, and we'll just launch into discussion. I'll tell you my thoughts for this discussion, and you all see if this works for you. It was to just do a go around first and try to capture. Hi, Maggie. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself since we just did a round of introductions?
Marty Sobey.
Have some cookies.
Oh, yeah. There So I thought that we could go around and hear from the people in this room what your questions, thoughts, concerns, topics are that you want to make sure to discuss in the context of this conversation, which is really focused on oil and gas concerns as they relate to the Iowa Landfill Superfund site. And then I'll write them up so we have a sense of the kinds of things that we want to discuss, and then we'll figure out what the right sequence, like there may be someone who can speak to some of these things, and then we'll get to the questions. So does that work for folks if we just, before we get into the discussion, do a go around and folks just share what it is that you would like to see discussed tonight as a topic or a question, and then we'll just capture it before we launch in. Okay, I'm seeing the nodding head, so I'm hoping that means yes, that works. So if folks could just throw out what it is that you would like to see discussed, or any specific topics or questions, I'm just going to write them up. We'll go through them.
I'd be happy to talk about the MOU between COGCC and CDPHE on Class 2 injection wells. And then also the certificate of designation process generally.
Okay, great. Certificate of designation, is that what it is?
That's correct.
Okay. Great.
Just been abbreviating that as CD.
CD process. Okay, that's great. What else?
I would like to know, extraction is going to be approved for the gathering facility for all their oil and gas. They'll be going by pipeline, and they will not tell the city why they don't want to know the city where the pipeline's going to be laid. They don't want to tell them, and they're not telling the city why they're not doing it. So that's a concern for me.
You mentioned a company name?
Extraction.
Extraction, yeah.
Extraction, is it pipeline plans in particular, or is it just beyond that?
They'll be from the wells, they'll be moving the oil and fracking water to a gathering facility, and they're not telling us where they're going to lay the pipeline.
I probably have that information. Are you talking about the Houlihan pipeline or the Jamiso pipeline?
The Jamiso.
They were about to resubmit that to us. They've changed operators again.
Okay.
And now it was Discovery, then it was Rocky Mountain Midstream, and now it's Elevation, which is a subsidiary of Extraction. And we have the plans and the new layout, which I can share with you.
Okay, good.
Okay, so Danielle, we may come back to you on that, but I'm just going to capture this sort of general question.
And one other thing, it just occurred to me today, with the increasing heat, we're going to be having more temperatures up in the hundreds, probably higher. And with all this oil and gas going on, I mean, could any of this explode from this intense heat?
No.
Okay.
Do you want to know? The short answer is no from Richard Rader, and do you want it up here?
No.
Oh, I thought it was Richard.
Okay. It doesn't self-explode.
Okay.
Okay, well, let me know if we want to come back and actually have that up. What else?
Well, I was prepared to speak on our process of review for an underground injection well. So I can address that.
That's great, okay. Okay, so that's specifically for injection wells. And people may have other questions for you. Great.
Well, I have a question. Seismic activity comes from these activities, so we don't know if there's a fault under the Superfund, but I would like to understand, you know, what happens if there's a fault and it goes like this, what happens to all the stuff that's in 138 million, where do they go? Some of that's alleged, I understand, but we sure have been shown it's not true.
Okay.
What is
The fault.
the fault?
I want to follow up on what John has just said, because I think you were reading my mind.
I saw him doing that.
Why, yes, all in mind melt. What I don't understand is why don't we know if there's a fault?
Okay,
I mean, alleged is one thing, and we can have all these speculations about what the effects of injection wells are going to be, but I want an answer as to whether we're actually dealing with this or not.
okay.
Let me try to answer that question. I think I could walk through in my review process and address some of that.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Stuart, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So, and will the health department be giving us some information? There's a growth fault white paper that was put out by the health department. And will there be some, will you be able to discuss some of that?
Sure. There's
Okay.
nothing new to offer beyond the white paper, but yeah.
Just a reminder of what's in there. Okay.
And I do bring.
Is that the EPA there, Joy?
Wait, sorry. Go ahead, Linda.
I do have a report that we had Tetra Tech do when they reviewed the growth fault, so I have that available if people want it.
Okay, so when it comes to the growth fault, we do have CDPHE and we do have a Tetra Tech paper. Okay, good. Anything else yet?
I was late and I'm sorry. And even after I walked in, I wasn't really here for a few minutes. So when you talk about questions, we have parameters around the questions, or we ask anything?
All I said was that in the past, this CAG, because it's been focused on EPA and CDPG convened it to have input and address questions with respect to their management of the site. So we haven't gotten into questions of like the city or state or county's jurisdiction or decision-making so much, except as as informational matters. But tonight, because for reasons we talked about last week, this seemed like a good opportunity to talk about questions about fracking and injection wells as they relate to Lowry Landfill Superfund site more generally. So that's the general parameter, but I think you can throw out what questions you have and we can see if it fits or feels like there's a different box for it, or, yeah.
Well, I still haven't gotten a response. My concise response to the question I had asked back in May.
Which one? The question?
That we discussed at the end of the last meeting.
Is that the one about, the residential, okay, so you're not talking about specifically oil and gas.
That's why I
but
asked you if there are parameters.
Yeah, so one thing I did say is if anyone had any other topics, and that to me sounds like another topic or at least a question, so I'm just gonna make a note that before we segue into talking about the August meeting, come back to that and just see if there's a response, unless.
Yeah, because that's under number 2. The work session, that's where you.
Great. So do you want to address that now real quick before we go into the oil and gas things, or do you want to come back to it?
Let's come back to it.
Can we come back to it?
I mean, you're kind of on a roll.
I feel like I'm on a roll, but why don't, but that's okay. I messed up the ordering. I apologize. I messed up the ordering. But why don't we just allow 10, 15 minutes at 7:30 and we'll come back to that question and any other follow-up from last week.
And any other follow-up?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I do have other things.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, no, I put that on the agenda, so I apologize that we launched it. Okay, so I will make sure we wrap up by 7:30 on this discussion. What else with respect to the oil and gas questions in Lowry. Are there any other comments or questions about?
So I think that's a lot. Richard says that's a lot.
It's a lot, of
I
course,
agree
it's a
with
lot.
that. But I think that my main concern is that we're getting a lot of activity in the area. And I'm very concerned about the 138 million gallons of liquid waste still in those unlined pits. And Tom and I have felt vibrations in the ground since they've started doing these activities in the area. We don't know where they're from, but Tom's house, they've had mirrors go askew and pictures fall off the walls, and we've never had that happen before, and I've lived out here since '74. And they did a lot of bombing then. And I can remember the bombing practices that shake me in when I'm standing there ironing when the bombing range was still used. So I think it's a really serious question of how those unlined pits are going to be impacted. Is there a growth fault out there, considering the state's growth fault study, which was released, and we're still waiting to see if EPA agrees with this growth fault issue or not. There's still not any real conclusion from that, to my mind.
Yeah.
And so since we also know that there's supposed to be an injection well within 5 miles of this site, some specialists say, well, you're not going to get seismic activity within a mile, further than a mile, but yet we have other experts who say it can be 10 miles, it can be up to 10 miles. And so what I'm saying is, like, if we could, I would really like to focus primarily on the pits and the effects of all of this, and what kind of guidance do we have, what kind of sand wedges and fractures are under these pits. I've seen a lot of them, but I need somebody that's smarter than I am to help us talk about this.
Yeah.
So if we can, I'd like to focus.
So it seems to me like there's sort of 2 buckets of topics. One is just to hear from folks at the state and the county, the MOU with the state, the certificate of designation process, and any kind of current plans, and Diane can speak to that. So kind of an update and framework, and that maybe that's sort of first, probably. And then it seems like, and the process with respect to reviewing injection wells at the COGCC. And then the second set of questions really then take it to Lowry specifically, and questions primarily about the question of the possible growth fault and the unlined pits, and whether there's implications from fracking and or injection and the concerns about seismicity that relate to that. So can we take them sort of in 2 separate, I mean, obviously these are very related. Maybe we can turn to you all generally, and the state and the county, to go through these things with us. And then within half an hour, we'll just want to make sure that we transition to talking more specifically about Lowry and these questions. Does that work? Generally speaking, we'll probably want to hear from the state and EPA and others with respect to the growth fault.
So can I say one clarification? For those who are at the table that don't know about the legislation that Representative Goose is putting through, is there anybody here that doesn't understand?
Yeah, why don't you just quickly say what it is?
Yeah, Representative Goose is putting through, he's just submitting legislation regarding, let me put it right here. It's a bill to prohibit oil extraction beneath, here it is, fracking would ban oil, gas, and mineral drilling beneath federally owned Superfund national priority list sites, including the former Rocky Flats nuclear weapons plant. And I have an article if you want to look at it, but he's working on that now. And like I said, Congressman Crow is very interested in, does this just say offsite, or does it say, on-site, or does it say if you have an on-site boom? Does it include the legislation? Will it address that possibility of having something happen for them off-site? Okay. So Jason Crow's office will be getting back with us and attending future meetings to help us more clearly, and hopefully staff from the Goose's office will also come to our
Do
meetings.
you have that electronically?
Yes.
You could send it to us.
I would be happy to.
And Linda, go.
So I do want to make I guess it just needs to be clarified. So in the Superfund world, when we talk about a federal facility, we talk about sites that are owned by the US government, the military. So that would be like Berkeley Air Force Base, Rocky Flats was a military site. The Lowry landfill Superfund site is not considered a federal facility in the Superfund world. So that legislation, and I haven't read it, but from the title, I think it wouldn't be, Lowry would not be part of that. However, that does not preclude someone adding private sites to that legislation or drafting their own. So I just wanted to make that clear for you guys, so you weren't thinking this was going to be directly pertaining to Lowry.
We also consider it is an NPL site.
Right, but it's
So I
titled
guess
federal
we have to
facility.
for the legislation to be written and for them to tell us how they're doing it and see where they're doing it, to see whether Lowry would be part of it.
So but the point is that if it has certain wording, it may actually exclude Lowry, and so that would be a question.
I got that. So
Whether-
that's something we have to listen for because nobody knows right now. That's exactly what we're researching.
Perfect. All right, well, what if we turn it over to the CGCC Aurora folks, and however you all want to do it.
Sure, I think maybe it might make sense to start out with the MOU and the CD process. So just real quick myself, like I said, I'm Sean Hackett, I'm with CDPHE. I'm our energy liaison, so I'm the liaison over to COGCC. I coordinate pretty frequently with our environmental programs on our regulation of the oil and gas industry. So yeah, I'd like to talk about kind of our agencies, COGCC and CDPHE's shared responsibility over, yes sir?
Do not use acronyms.
Excuse me, sorry. So CDPHE is the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and I'm the liaison to the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. So I think those are the main ones I used. If I missed any, please let me know.
So maybe for purposes of tonight's meeting, if people say COGCC, they're referring to Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, which is the state agency that oversees oil and gas. What other acronyms are, anyway, and then MOU too.
So that's a memorandum of understanding. So an agreement, a contract.
Thanks,
So,
Tom.
but thank you for that. Yeah, I speak in regulators speak pretty easily. So thanks for calling me out. But so this agreement, it outlines our shared responsibility over these types of facilities. And it was an agreement that was entered into back in the year of 2000. And as you all are aware, the active underground injection is regulated by the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. And in this case, they've delegated that authority to the state of Colorado, to the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. And our shared responsibility over those are outlined in this memorandum of understanding. And waste is either regulated by their agency, the COGCC, or our agency, depending on where it's located. So at producer-owned, the primary field operations during transport and at producer-owned or non-commercial facilities, those waste would be regulated by COGCC. On the other hand, once it enters a commercial treatment or disposal facility, so one that charges for other operators to take their waste to, it would be regulated by CDPHE's solid waste program. And that memorandum of understanding, that's available on COGCC's website. On their main page, they have a tab that says, I think governments, and then within that, they have one for state, and within that, they have all the different agreements that they have with our agency. So just real quick, in addition to this waste management agreement, there's also some agreements around water quality, so you can find those on their website. Downhole disposal in Class 2 injection wells might also require what's called a certificate of designation from the county. And those are, the CD is the abbreviation for those. What those do is they authorize the use of land as a solid waste facility or landfill. And those are only issued if it's determined that certain technical standards are met and that the local issues have been considered and satisfied. So in terms of what happens when the county receives this application for a certificate of designation, once they receive that, like Arapahoe County has in this case, they forward that application packet over to our solid waste program. And pursuant to this agreement that we have with COGCC, we send it, we forward it to them, and then we coordinate with them on the technical review. And I think Stuart may be able to talk a little bit more about some of that. And that technical review in general is designed to determine whether the siting, design, and the criteria of the proposed facility are protective of public health and the environment. And once that review is complete, a recommendation is made by the state to the county on that application. And then ultimately the county has the authority to decide whether or not that certificate of designation should be granted. And I think Diane mentioned she's spoken with some of you in the past about that county level hearing process and the public involvement process. So I would defer to her on any questions about the local review process there. But that's really just a high level overview of how our different agencies interact on regulation of these types of waste facilities.
So, and just clarification, so you're just talking about the interaction when it comes to injection of fluids back into the ground, as opposed to fracking or oil and gas drilling production in general?
That's correct. Yeah, this agreement is just specific to the Class 2 injection well facilities.
So, and the other confusing part is this is under the solid waste. But these are liquids.
Solid waste include liquids and gases. You have to, you could look at EPA terms for the definition.
So then do you all just want to sort of continue along?
So
were there questions? I'm sorry, Sonia.
I was wondering, since CDPHE is public health, regarding induced seismicity hazards, does CDPHE ask or require the operators to share the thumper truck data with CDPHE so they would gain further information about the
To my
architecture
knowledge,
underground there?
That's not something that we request. A lot of the downhole type of issues, underground types of issues would be more within COGCC's purview.
We receive a monthly report of the injection pressure and the injection volume, the maximum pressure in that month, and the gross volume that they injected during that month.
I was more interested in who is taking the lion's share of responsibility for assessing the geologic hazards that may exist in that area prior to COGCC.
The Oil and Gas Conservation Commission.
But COGCC, when I spoke with them, the lead for the injection well said that he looks usually a mile radius from where the injection well is intended to go, and then looks at the USGS, are there any listings of active fault lines, et cetera. So there's a pretty small area that's being examined. So that's what's.
Well, that's not exactly correct. I mean, in the general sense, that's a truth. Bob gave you, that was Bob Cable,
Yeah.
I assume you talked to. That's generalized. What we do is we take a look at the USGS map and their seismic activity, and we look at a greater area. Bob does look at detail of all of the existing oil and gas wells, all the existing water wells within that 1 mile radius. That's, I think, more the context of that 1 mile's comment. But we look for any kind of seismic activity, and yes, you can get an academic that will give a varied answer, and they'll always give it in kilometers. They'll talk 10 kilometers as the general number, which is about 6.6 miles. And as far as an induced distance away. And then the next number is, some people will creep that up to 20 kilometers, which, you're now looking at maybe 16 miles or so, just perspective numbers. And I'm happy to go into induced seismicity in more detail, but I just want to kind of address your initial question.
Right.
That we look at the any kind of seismic activity in the area, We look at what basement fault data we have, any kind of literature. We'd love to get the Tri-County growth fault study. But we look at whatever studies we can find academically. We engage with USGS on Justin Rubenstein has done a lot of work in this area. No relation, Bill Ellsworth, also at USGS. We're participating in the Groundwater Protection Council's work on induced seismicity. And then the Colorado Geologic Survey. We engage with them and Matt Morgan over there. We engage with quite a few people. Ann Sheehan at the University of Colorado had several seismometers around, particularly focused on that Greeley event. Happy to walk through that scenario also and sort of what we learned from that event. I could dive really deep in this topic.
I was just still concerned about the radius that is being examined in terms of.
It's not just a 1 mile radius.
That's what he told me. That's why I'm
Well, I think
saying
we're
I'm concerned.
getting, it's hard to have conversations over the phone sometimes. What we do, like I say, is we look at all the oil and gas wells and water wells within a 1 mile radius. So to me, that's where the 1 mile comes from. We don't limit ourselves in that induced seismicity world.
And do you have I'm sorry,
Go
one more
ahead.
question. Do you have some kind of rubric to judge, well, this particular well pad has, 20 arms and then there's nearby, an injection well and this. Do you look at the cumulative impact of the, when you
Yes.
say you looked at
Yeah,
all the wells, do you have
yes,
a
so-
standard where you can say, you know what, this would be one too many?
Yeah, what we have in this kind of cumulative area is, let me step back and give you some of the history and the ideas and the perspectives we have about underground. First off, of course, you're all aware Rocky Mountain Arsenal in the 60s and the induced 60s and 70s of the induced seismic event. That's the well out at Rocky Mountain Arsenal drilled into Precambrian basement. You know what Precambrian basement is? It's granite. It has close to zero permeability, zero porosity, meaning it can't absorb any fluids. So if you inject fluids at a high rate, high volume, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to induce seismic because it's got to crack that rock in order to put that fluid somewhere. So it's pretty intuitive what happened. Now the next thing is USGS out of Berkeley and Chevron with their headquarters in San Francisco teamed together, and in the Rangeley field in western Colorado, near the town of Rangeley, kind of Grand Junction area, they tried that. They said, hey, let's inject fluid. So it was a water flood, oil field injecting water. And let's inject water until we induce a seismic event and see if man can do it. Anthropomorphic induced seismic events. And yes, they did it. They eventually injected enough water to cause the rocks to crack. Proof. Back in the 60s, yes, man can inject and cause seismic. The next kind of interesting historic classic case of induced seismicity is again on the west slope. It's the Paradox Valley. That's an interesting project in that it's a desalination project. The Bureau of Reclamation is capturing surface water and injecting it into the ground. They're capturing that surface runoff because it's highly saline. It was getting in the Dolores River that was going into the Colorado River. And they wanted to capture this for, keeping the Colorado River clean. And what did they do? They drilled a well into the Precambrian basement and they induced seismic events. And Bureau of Reclamation then put in a whole lot of monitors, whole lot of testing, still active today. And so they've monitored that. And what they've learned is that, very interesting, you can inject for 10 days and then let the pore pressure dissipate. I don't know if there's a civil engineer in the group, but you might recall your Moore Coulomb failure. Basically, it's pore pressure and the fracture envelope. If you inject, you will change the stress field. And that's what they're doing. So a lot of people think that induced seismicity is making things slippery. That's not really what's happening. What you're doing is you have to have a pre-existing crack. So it's not a new crack that's causing these induced events. It's a pre-existing crack, and you have to have it with fluid pressure already in it. The analogy, I'll give Justin Rubenstein the analogy example, it's a hydraulic brake. Your hydraulic brake has hydraulic fluid. Water is a hydraulic fluid, meaning it's doesn't really compress. If you press on it, that pressure wave will go through the hydraulic fluid, water, and then it will activate your brake. So what we're having here is on that Precambrian crystalline rock interface and the sedimentary rock, right there, that interface, you have a pressure wave going across that interface. And when it finds a pre-existing crack with fluid in it, that pressure goes into that crack and creates a parting pressure, moving it enough to reduce friction, and then it slips, inducing an event. That was, it was out of the University of South Carolina, where they did a study on dams and induced events. And so that's what they found, is that these are pressure induced. It's not slippery. It's not water creating slipperiness. So the next piece of this puzzle is induced events. If you now take a look at the record of what I said, Rocky Mountain Arsenal, you now take a look at Paradox Valley, Youngstown, Ohio is an induced event. All the events in Oklahoma that you're all hearing about, the event in outside of Dallas, they all have one thing in common. They're all injecting at or in the crystalline basement rock. So we as a reviewer, you're asking, what are we proactively doing? We look for an offset distance between the basement and the injection zone. We also look for a
Can you explain what that means? Sorry. An
offset distance. We
between
want, the injection zone is, let's just use numbers, 10,000 feet. Crystalline basement is at 11,000 feet. So now I have a 1,000-foot gap between of sedimentary rock that I could dissipate that pore pressure. So I don't get that pore pressure into the basement. So that's one of the biggest things that we learned. And in the Greeley event, that's exactly what happened. In that they did drill real close to the basement rock. What we noticed when they drilled that well is that they had somewhat indicators of the fact that there were existing fractures at that zone. We call them lost circulation zones, where you're drilling your well and the fluid kind of falls and goes into the rock real easily. That's one indicator. Another indicator is you monitor the drilling rate. So when you are drilling your well, when you get into fractured rock, it's a drill bit is like a chisel, and it chisels real quickly because the rock is already kind of broken up. So the drilling rate, the rate of penetration is faster. So we noticed that in the drilling logs. The next thing we noticed is when we asked for them to do logging a hole. They put down tools in the hole, and we can get the electrical signal. We can tell what kind of rock it is. They couldn't get the tool at the bottom of the hole, meaning that the hole kind of sloughed in on it. So we had those three indicators, and we could tell by looking at those, it's called the drilling log. we looked at the drilling log and could see where this, I'm gonna call it hole competency or rock competency started to fall apart. And we then cemented that portion of the well back, sealing off those fractures so we could not communicate that fluid pressure down to the basement. And since then, we have not had any seismic events. They do have monitors out there, and all commercial wells, we require a monitor. The next thing is on the, you also kind of mentioned volume. We do a test, we call it a step rate test. So you injected a pressure, or you injected a rate, measure the pressure. Inject at a rate, increasing it, and measure the pressure. So we're measuring how strong those rocks are. Eventually, you will crack those rocks. So Rainswood told us. Now we know a pressure rate and we know a pressure and we know a rate. So when we permit a well, we'll permit it out under that rate so we don't crack the rocks, and we're just merely pushing the fluids into the porous parts of the well.
How do you know that the commercial injection companies follow your injection rates, not over injecting?
Great question. So we get that monthly report. So we get that monthly report of their volume and their rate, and they tell us how many days they inject. Now, it's not a perfect number, but we have a gross number, and we do permit. And anybody that injects over 10,000 barrels a day, they have to have a seismometer. So we have to, that's one of our requirements, you have to have a seismometer. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is, because I just mentioned a number, 10,000, it sounds big. One of the things I want you to realize is what was going on in Oklahoma will not happen here and cannot happen here, in the sense that they were injecting in the range of 30 to 50,000 barrels a day on a per well basis at this basement interface. And we have the entire state of Colorado, we now have 300 and, it's on my presentation, but so I'm going to give you 380 saltwater disposal wells in the area of Oklahoma where they had this problem. They had almost 600 injecting this huge number that we've never allowed. We didn't allow it, and so there's the kind of volume question. And also, you might say, well, where do you get 10,000? That comes from Southern Methodist University in Dallas. They did studies down in the Barnett, and they saw that seismic activity started to increase at that 10,000 barrels a day. And that's a number that you can say, well, that's what the rocks can accept. And at some point around that number, that they, it's just, you're putting too much water at a faster rate than the porosity can kind of move that volume.
Pardon my ignorance, but isn't there a limit to how much the porous layer can accept?
Good question, and that's kind of a yes and no answer. What we do to answer that question is we inject a gross volume, or we permit a gross volume. We use there's one of these tools you can put down the hole. You can measure the pore space. So like we can get a pore volume. So the rock is like a sponge. It's got all those little sponge holes in them. That's the pore space. So we use what's called a neutron density log, and we measure the porosity. So we get a porosity number. So percent porosity. And now we have, and we use an electric log, and we get the thickness of the rock, the pore rock. And so now we have a thickness, and we want a radius. We permit a well at a quarter-mile radius, and that it gives us a volume. And rough numbers, it always depends on their ejection rate or whatnot, but that's about 10 meters worth. So now we've got a limit. So we What the value of that is one, we have a limit, and they have to come back and ask us for more. And we'll give them 1/8 of a mile at that point. It's a radius, and that's a big number. That'll give them another 10 years. What we want is to have a second review. We want to see what's going on, and we'll be aware of that, so we have a second review. The next point of that is now I have at least a general perspective of the radius of influence. I've got a 1/4 mile radius. So when you talked about cumulative effect, we want to make sure those radii aren't intersecting. So now I have, and you can almost think of it as, remember I was talking about the induced seismicity is a pressure. So I've got this pressure wave I'm talking about. Now I've kind of put a perspective on that pressure wave. So I've got a 1/4 mile. So that's kind of the spacing we want to make sure we maintain. And of course, at some point, if you kept increasing the volume, these things are, that's when we say, no, you're done.
So when you inject 10,000 barrels per day, basically, and millions and millions of gallons of water, not like water I drink in a cup. Got stuff in it. That's why we inject it down. Where does it go? Does it just stay down there for perpetuity, or does it never
Well, one of the things,
disseminate
one
and
of
go down?
one of the things we look for is a shale zone above. So you want to have this, you want to have, not only from induced seismicity, you want a shale zone below your injections, because we don't want that pressure going down to that basement to reduce seismic events. We also want a shale zone above so that it is constrained.
So it doesn't contaminate surface water.
Correct.
Or well water.
Correct. We are, keep in mind that, at least in this well we're talking about, they're injecting in a range of 7,000 to 10,000 feet. So you got another 5,000 feet of, or 7,000 feet of rock. You've got to push that through. And when I was a part of the EPA's hydraulic fracture study, they modeled the ability of fracture fluid to migrate to the surface, and they couldn't get it to the surface. The University of California did models, and they got it to the surface around 1 million years. Percolated. I mean, that's what it takes. So you're not going to get it to the surface. And that's why it's so important to look at those old wells, because they were able to get it to the surface if you had an old well that wasn't abandoned properly, plugged properly. So that's why we look at these old wells that are down into the ground, that are near or penetrating that injection zone. Now, in those cases, the University of California study was able, and the EPA study was able to get that fluid to migrate to the surface. Now I got contact.
That would be not good.
Not good, yeah. So, I mean, that kind of gets towards the hydraulic fracturing question too, in that the engineering staff, when we do a permit review, that's why we look at these old adjacent wells. We look at those and make sure they're abandoned correctly, and that's a condition of approval that we put on any of these new wells. If there's an old well nearby, they're going to have to go remediate that well to make sure the scenario or the vision that you have doesn't happen. You just can't have that. If you want to end the oil and gas industry, have that here in Colorado.
So the depth is too far down to affect aquifers?
Yes.
There's rock between the aquifers.
There's a lot of rock in between, and the wellbore construction is designed to have steel and cement to isolate off all the aquifers.
So it seems that what you're saying is that there's no fractured areas that are above.
To my knowledge, the faulting that I am the knowledge of here in the Front Range area. Now, I'm not including, right up against the foothills.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the seismic sections in this This EPA study showed seismic sections and cross sections, and Dr. Weimer, they got Dr. Weimer's seismic sections. Those do go to the surface. Those are, and need to be almost right up against the foothills. Here in the Front Range, there are cracks in the basement, and they do go a couple hundred feet up, and then in the Niobrara Formation where they're drilling into, there's these kind of listric faults. Most of those are due to diagenetic. Dr. Sonnenberg at the School of Mines has a lot of papers on that. But these are they're called diagenetic. So the Niobrara was an ocean mud, and as it compressed over time, all the water kind of gets squeezed out over millennium. And as it compressed, it created these kind of listric faults, much like your growth faults. And I think it's very possible that you have growth faults at the surface. Those, in a geologic perspective, would be more settlement scenarios. So there could be near surface things.
How deep is the surface? When you say out of the surface,
Surface, in my mind, is something that's a couple hundred feet deep.
not 1,000, 2,000, just a couple.
Marky, did you have a question?
Yeah, a couple of really elementary questions. Show my ignorance, but.
No, I said an awful lot. So clarification is appropriate.
So I believe you said that through modeling, it was determined that these fluids would take millions of years or something to ever get.
Extremely long time, yes.
Okay. So modeling has been used before with the Lowry landfill site, and it said that the chemicals would not leak for at least 200 to 300 years, and that was proven not to be true. So I'm just wondering about the modeling that you're talking about, if there's not room for error there.
Any model can have error. I'm not going to deny that. My understanding of more than likely, my understanding is that was an EPA mod flow, and I don't know, it's had multiple versions of that mod flow. And I don't have knowledge of those models, so I can't really respond. I had a class, my hydrology class, I had to do a mod flow years ago, so I'm not that much aware of it. But I can tell you that the model that University of California did, it was a three-phase model, and mod flow is only a liquid model. So the University of California's model, when I say three-phase, I mean oil, gas, and water. Oil, gas, and water flow differently. And I know they did it as another difference between mod flow and this model is this was, my brain's thick. It was a cellular model where they do a lot of cells. Mod flow doesn't. My understanding was that when I did it, it was not that. It was just a calculated answer.
Marky, you have a follow-up, and I think Sonia does too, and then I'm also mindful of time and wanting to get to our other topics. So let's keep going.
I was just going to say, concrete pretty much always over time eventually does crack.
Thank you. Okay, first comment, concrete is not what is used in an oil and gas well. Concrete is what the sidewalks are. Concrete has gravel in it. Concrete has the surface elements that are exposed to it. In the civil engineering world, you would more call what oil and gas uses as grout. This is cement. It has no aggregate with it. It's just cement and water for the most part. Now they can do all the same things as additives to make it cure faster or slower, but concrete is cement plus aggregate. And now, let me answer your vision, is what you see on the surface is it got all kinds of cracks. And concrete is very good under compression. It's not good, in other words, it needs to be held. And so, but on the surface, it has no confining force. So you see cracks at the surface. And once the cracks at the surface get water in them, the freeze thaw takes over and the cracks get bigger. So that's what you're seeing on your bridges. They put steel in your bridges because the steel gives it tensional strength. So the combination of steel and cement are tensional and compressive. In an oil and gas well, you have the steel of the tubulars, the casings you put in. So now I've got my tensional strength so that I don't balloon out everything and break it, burst it. The concrete, the cement that we place is a grout, and you place that between the steel and the well bore, and that seals that area. It's generally speaking under a confining stress because the casings have pressure in them and the rocks are trying to push in. So you've got a confining stress there, and that makes the grout stay intact. But the biggest thing the grout's doing is not only for some well bore strength and well construction strength, it's also sealing off all those water zones and gas zones and oil zones that may want to come in.
I had two questions. One is, you were saying that Colorado has moved away from the idea of injecting into the bedrock, the crystalline bedrock, and more into the sedimentary rock. And there was a study, 2018, from University of California, Santa Cruz, finding that injecting into sedimentary rock can produce bigger, more distant earthquakes than injecting into the underlying basement rock. And there were some other studies that were examining this and analyzing why that would be the case. But it seems like they both pose risks of seismic activity. And from what I've read, without careful advanced understanding of what the geology is in the area in terms of any possible faults, that the likelihood of induced seismicity is always there. They're just different types of events between sedimentary and bedrock.
Well, if you could give me that article, I'd take a
Sure.
look at it. The one I'm remembering from California was related to, I'm going to mispronounce this, Salton Sea, and they were injecting pretty far away. And my understanding is that was the fault in the Salton Sea activity was correlated to a fault, offset fault from the San Andreas fault. And so that fault transmitted. So again, I think it fits my model that I was trying to say, is they injected basically in that fault until they hit some form of resistance and then it cracked.
This was actually international data. They looked at data from all over the world, and I think it was Goebel and Brodsky that did the study. And then I had another question.
Sonia, you'll share that article though?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that is regarding hydraulic fracturing itself, even though the injection wells seem to pose the highest risk of induced seismicity. There are a number of events and places that have occurred with just fracturing, given that that's kind of a mini operation of deep injection because you're injecting high volumes at great pressure, et cetera. So in Arkansas, in England, and I think in Kansas and some other places.
In the Ohio basin play, that play is the rocks that they were trying to develop are sitting on the basement. So I think it fits my basement model. I know that they had some implied, I'm gonna say implied because I think it was slightly disputed in England, so that's a little unclear. That one, there were some articles written, I'm not gonna deny that, but there were also discounting articles. British Columbia has some induced events. That's extremely shallow. That's actually a coal bed methane play. What's interesting about shallow hydraulic fracturing is when you're at about 2,000 feet and shallower, this is the BP example, the stress field is different. You don't have enough overburden, and those are called pancake fracks. So the crack opens vertically, because that's the least principal stress, and then they reach out horizontally. And then the height is this way. In our here in the DJ Basin, the frac geometry is more in what we call a penny frac. So the crack height goes vertically, and the least principal stress is in one of the horizontal directions, and so it opens kind of in an east-west direction, and then the principal stress, because the overburden of the rocks is the biggest stress. They have a height vertically, and then they do again reach out. But they're called penny fracks because the height and the distance away are about the same. It's broadly a 300-foot height and a 300-foot length. Now that's the physical crack. One of the things I like to, it's always interesting, when you talk hydraulic fracturing, you need to make sure who you're talking to. If you talk to the guy on the trunk pump, you know, kind of, I'm gonna crack this rock and I'm gonna do the biggest job I can, he talks big numbers. And if you look at the models, you can get a stress field that might be 1,000 feet away. The frac height still is in this kind of 300 feet. But that's what they kind of model. But that's not what we see actually happening when we look at microseismic and we look at the physical drainage of what's happening. What happens is, in reality, is when this is getting at your model question to some degree, you can model a geometric shape. So you model a crack, but what's really happening in the rock, so that's actually a volume that you cracked. But what's really happening is it's a spider web. So the cracks are all kind of going like this. So if you take that gross volume that you modeled that maybe was 1,000 feet, the reality is I created a spider web of these hairline cracks that are only maybe 200 to 300 feet away from the wellbore.
So I'm kind of wanting to do a time check because I feel like it could go into,
Oh, I could
right?
go
It's
forever.
an infinite, and there's a lot, and it's going to beget more questions, is my guess. But we have all these questions that are specific to Lowry and the questions of Falls. I feel like we should get to in the last 20 minutes. So I'm wondering if I could pause this. Richard, you have a comment, and also we never talked more about it.
Could Lee explain to the group what he believes is underneath?
Yeah, that's exactly. You're our.
His presentation.
Oh, I think I'm not doing a presentation.
You already did.
I think you did your presentation.
Yeah.
Well, but I think, Richard, you're about to take us to our next sort of main topic. Before we do, I guess I wanted to know if you wanted to, yes, or.
Can I do one conclusion?
Yes.
Just to let you know the status of the permits. They're in process. There are
When you say permits.
the permits to inject. There is a Form 2, which is the drilling permit to drill the well. That's the downhole part, and that would be the same permit as any oil and gas well. And there's the 2A, which is, I like to call it, it's the oil and gas location assessment. And that is trying to understand what the operator is going to build and the relationships to the things at the surface, setbacks, the building, all of that. And then Then we have the separate documents. There's a whole lot of attachments with the other two documents. We have the Form 31, which creates the underground injection facility. When we say facility, what we're saying is visualize an underground tank. So the vessel in the ground. We say facility, we're not talking about the buildings. And so we permit the vessel in the ground, the pore space. And then we have the 31, which there might be a couple straws into this pore space. The big walk away I want everybody to capture is the thing we look for, even start our review, is a surface use agreement. Meaning that the surface owner has said, yes, I want this on my property. The reason I say that is underground injection is an EPA approval. It is not a right of a mineral owner.
Could you repeat that?
Yeah. Underground injection is an EPA approval, which they delegated that review to us, but it is not a mineral right.
It's opposite.
It's
You're
nothing-
putting it back, you're not taking it in.
Exactly. If you're injecting into the ground, that's an
Not
EPA,
right.
that's an EPA process.
But you need the surface owners.
You need the surface, because the surface owner needs to grant you access to the surface.
Okay, so like in the underground injection well, because you're starting at one point and it's gonna end a mile away, because it's like a parabola, right? So do you get agreements from that whole mile of people, surface owners?
Each operator takes that in their own, at this time, there's no legislation in Colorado that defines that. So we use just the fact that they need to have a grant of access to use the surface. The pore
Or the
space,
actual-
in Colorado, there's no legislation to define who owns the pore space.
No, but I mean on the surface. So you get the surface owners that you're getting permission from, is it just where the well's going in? But
Yes.
because the well goes underground and it curves,
Just
right?
where the surface appurtenances are.
So when it goes under other people's land, you don't have their access, right? Okay. I
Not for
just,
injection.
all right.
No, we do, there's no legislation that defines that. Now, many operators are seeking that on their own.
Okay. Makes sense.
Are they given a notice or anything?
We notice a quarter-mile radius around for both mineral owners and surface owners.
So if somebody wants to put an injection well on their private property, that's not a right. It has to have approval from the EPA. I mean, somebody
That's all I
can't do
said.
that. just
What I
because
said was, they have to have a surface use agreement, you have to show us that. And then if they do, that's step one for us going through our approval process of the injection well. Now, what I want to say, I want to make sure it's also clear to you, is it's not a mineral right, so they have to go through the Arapahoe County zoning process to get approval for that use. Whatever Arapahoe County's approval process is, and they have said, Arapahoe County has said, we want a certificate of designation.
So, Diane, could you speak to the, well, this, on this, if a private owner of the private land wants to put a disposal well, does it go through the same process? I didn't think it did.
It's a surface use land application
Only.
process, right? And you probably know that in this case, EWS plans to purchase the surface.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering, if a private party wanted to drill and put a disposal well on their property, do they have to go through?
Yes.
Right.
They still have to go
Right.
through?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, definitely.
I misunderstood.
Yeah, because there's two different processes. So there's a surface and then there's downhole.
We're downhole. We're downhole. surface.
Right.
But we do go through our surface approval processes with the 2A process. We make sure that everything still meets our criteria. And that's what this this was what, under 181, this is what the director put out until we passed the budget, our rules, that we have the 16 different criteria that if you have one of these 16, the director is going to review the application for public health, safety, and welfare. And this one meets the criteria over 18 tanks. Yes, criteria number 8. So it will go through the director's special review.
So do you want to talk more about this, or do you want to transition, because we only have 15 minutes? Yeah.
I just wanted to make a point of clarification, a quick question. I thought the discussion was excellent, Stuart. When you were talking about Dr. Sonnenberg from the School of Mines and the interpretation, my impression is those fractures used to be interpreted as listic or growth faults. Those are kind of synonymous terms. And he's interpreted those as polygonal faults.
You're correct.
Okay.
You're definitely correct.
Okay. So I just wanted to, so people
school.
aren't thinking those are listric faults or growth faults anymore, as opposed to what the state's focused on here. So that clarification is right.
They don't go to the surface.
No, that's right. They're considered monolithologic, meaning they just stay in that one rock layer. And polygonal simply means multiple parts. It's almost like looking at mud cracks on the surface. That's the pattern these are.
Yeah, there's still that. I interpreted what he did in his article is he called it more of these diagenetic kinds of.
Sure. That's right.
So
Yes.
you're right. I'm a little old school in my listric terms.
So that's fine. And so my question then is simply, I understand that you rely on published resources in terms of known faults and structures and so forth, and that's all copacetic, but do you by any chance have the benefit of also seeing the confidential or proprietary structural interpretation of the explorers, of the oil and gas producers? Because they're targeting something, they see something based on their seismic data. Do you have the benefit of those data by any chance? Not that I want them.
Sometimes we look at it.
You do?
In some context of things, well, one, we looked in the Greeley event, we asked to look at the sort of basement on that one.
Yes.
And we did see some interesting features, but the well was not on I thought for sure we'd see some kind of haziness.
Yes.
We saw 3D, and it didn't. What I think there in that was that due to this being a wrenched scenario.
Correct.
I think we could see some crisscrossing.
Yes.
Kind of halos.
Conjugate sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And my belief is, because we got 2 injection wells right there.
Yeah.
And we got the one to the north and the one a mile to the south. I think they're on opposite ends, and one was in a tensional setting and one was in a compressional.
Understood.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But
we'll stop talking about cool stuff.
Yeah, we gotta break you up, because you have to
separate us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any final questions for Stuart before we transition a little bit more to the Lowry context? Yes, Sonia.
I just wanted to ask regarding the earthquakes that have occurred in Colorado that are considered to be induced in Trinidad and Greeley and Utah, Nevada border, Utah, Colorado border. Were those all pertaining to injection wells of various sorts?
the Utah border is the Paradox Valley.
Okay.
Justin Rubenstein and I disagree with his interpretation of Raton Basin. So I'll just leave it at that.
So, but are they all pertaining to injection wells, or are some pertaining to?
Well, the Paradox Valley, yes. Raton Basin, I say no.
The Raton Basin has shallow coal bed methane production.
Okay.
So that's the 2,000 foot in shallow.
They're injecting in the Raton Basin. The disagreement that Justin and I have is he says, well, his statement is, well, they started injection, so therefore that caused it all. And it's like, well, you gotta have a little more evidence than that, Justin. I mean, there's known volcanic activity as recent as 10,000 years ago, 10 to 50,000 years ago. It's a part of the I was gonna say Mid-Atlantic Rift. All of a sudden, Rio Grande Rift. In other words, the Colorado Plateau's rotating, and right there, the San Luis Valley is actually a rift zone. It's pulling apart right there, which in my mind is causing all this volcanic activity. So it's a known recent activity. But we did ask the operator at the time, Pioneer, it's now been taken over by Evergreen. They've got a huge seismic network, about 30 borehole seismics, meaning that they inside of old wells, they put seismometers, and they've been studying it. I keep begging them to release the data. But what they've seen is what are called clusters. A very similar cluster, since you love to read this stuff, is the seismic cluster under Socorro, New Mexico. Those clusters are usually indicative of deep thermal activity. And there's two clusters, one in New Mexico and actually there's two in Colorado, one in Orfano Valley, Orfano County. So it doesn't, in other words, when you have these seismic induced events, they tend to be very linear. And when you look at the seismic data, it's very clustered. It's like little clouds, honeybees.
And the Trinidad ones as well?
Yeah, the Trinidad ones are like that. Whereas the Paradox Valley, it's a very linear. I mean, it looks like a fault. Arkansas Valley, where you can just see it, it's a linear event.
Okay, I'm gonna cut us off because now we have 5 minutes. And I really want you all to be able to get to that. But I do think that you all find each other for follow-up, and I did make a couple notes of some follow-up documents that are gonna be exchanged. We didn't do any, Diana, I don't know if you had any updates that you wanted to give folks on the extraction now elevation plans, or did we sort of cover that? Does anyone have any other questions about that?
And you mean the 2 pipeline applications?
Yeah, did anyone have questions? Did we get on that? Okay. Okay, I really want to sort of pass it over to, I don't know, whoever, EPA, state, I know that there were some questions about what, we started talking about this, and I think Richard was going to ask you to talk about what about if there's fault, what are the implications, what are the implications for the pits? Knowing that there's some questions about whether there's a fault and disagreements, and it's still at this point alleged. But anyway, I don't know how you all want to do that, but Lee, I don't know if we turn to you.
I don't either. I'm happy to talk.
Linda, do you want to say
Well, I
anything?
thought that we were gonna ask somebody to point out where the pits are. Do we have any kind of a picture or graphic or anything that we can talk against? Because we wonder, for people who are not as familiar with Lowry, I thought we were gonna show the site and where the pits are versus where growth faults and sand lenses and fractures we already know about. Talk about that in that manner.
That was my suggestion too, but I don't know if anyone brought.
I didn't bring any real graphics other than this holiday picture of what one of the waste pits looks like. And so all I wanted to say was this liquid waste in these waste pits, 138 million gallons, it didn't need seismic activity or fracking.
Tell them the name of that. That's the first mobile treatment technology.
Yeah, well, they called this co-disposal, and they would dig a trench and they'd fill it with municipal solid waste, the solid stuff here, and then they'd offload the liquids, the 138 million gallons of liquid. So this went on for roughly 15 years in about 75 to 78 waste pits. And generally speaking, those waste pits are concentrated in the south half of the Superfund site. That's where the big landfill mass is today. And so I'm not trying to discount the concerns that the public is bringing to the table here about oil and gas production and exploration and disposal, but the point is these fluids were introduced directly into the subsurface, and they didn't need anything more than gravity to do that. So So I think this is one of the hopes that the state has, is the conceptual site model that's being revised right now is going to consider not only the fate and transport of the dissolved contaminant plumes that we're aware of off-site, but also this free product, this so-called principal threat waste. So again, I'm not trying to discount the concerns, but this stuff is doing what it's going to do no matter what. And the fact that it was 138 million gallons over an area of roughly 200 acres, it's a lot of liquid waste in a small area. So the hope and the dream is, and you mentioned this earlier, Bonnie, that it's in the waste pits. I don't believe most of it is in the waste pits anymore. It moved along relatively rapidly. In fact, this picture kind of shows what the procedure was. If you do the math, they basically had one of these pits open on average for a couple, 3 months, and they would fill it with fluids as far as they could up to the top every day. And every morning when they'd come back, there was more room to put more. And so they did that until it would accept no more. And my only point is, I don't think we had oil and gas fracking and seismicity back then, although I guess RMA would be an exception to that back in the late 60s and 70s, but that was farther to the north from here. So, and then the only other thing, and we have such limited time, is the state does have a white paper, and there's basically in excess of a dozen data sets that are identified here in table 1. And we wrote this report in 2013. That was the draft. We finalized it in 2015. And in retrospect, when I go back and look at it, I can see if you're not motivated to understand why the growth fault is reflected in all these dozen or so data layers, there's no way to put the puzzle pieces together. You have to be motivated to see the growth fault. And the growth fault was seismically interpreted back in 1990 when they were siting the Dad's landfill immediately north of the site. And the salient point about the growth fault is not so much that they were having real trouble getting the energy into the ground, and they had to change. They destroyed one plate that they were hitting, and they argued, well, the data aren't great, but there is a growth fault here. And because it was only identified along one seismic line at one location, there was no way to orient the fault. But 2 or 3 decades later, when we delineated the plume's relatively narrow going off site. And when you plot where that growth fault was identified, which is literally in the center of section 31, that's precisely where the axis of the off-site plume is. So there's all these other data layers like lows in the weathered surface, the topography, potentiometric convergence. I'm not going to go through this whole list today, but the overall point the state would make is we think there's a much, much bigger cost to not evaluating the presence of that growth fault than there is the cost of actually evaluating it. When I say cost, I'm not just talking about financial, I'm talking about protection of the aquifers and protection of human health in the vicinity of the Superfund site. So if there's nothing to it, then it should be a relatively straightforward exercise of going and doing a couple more seismic reflection lines. And if it's not there, then it's not there. But if it is there, then we could actually use it to help us control and contain the plume. So that's the state's upshot. So, and I could talk for hours too, but nobody wants to hear that. So.
Well, and we did say we were going to end at 7:30, but my guess is that what remaining questions do people have, and if we need to figure out some way to get at those questions, we will. We can, or comments.
I'd like to know what the EPA is doing to define that fault and make sure that it's not or is under the site.
Okay, so this was before my time, but in March 2018, PWT and Tetra Tech were authorized by EPA to do a study on the growth fault. So this report's here, if anyone would like a copy, and then I can have Sarah or someone at our next meeting talk more in detail about this. Then they can be prepared, and they maybe I can get the person from Tetra Tech. We'll get the right person here.
Did you show that to the COGC?
I'm sure that. Well, I wasn't here in 2018, on the site.
Did you
So
get it?
it is in our public records, and I'm sure there were discussions on this, but
I'm just gonna say, the state has commented on the draft of this, and we weren't sure if EPA wanted to continue to maintain that document in the record, but, the growth fault that was identified north of the Superfund site is very shallow. It's in what's called the Cenozoic rocks. And I know you know what I'm talking about, but basically, Geology 101, there's Cenozoic, which is really shallow, which is the Dawson and the top of the Denver. Then there's the Mesozoic or middle, and zoic just means biota. And then Paleozoic below that, and then the Precambrian bedrock that we're talking about. So what effectively EPA did was they went and they looked at all the data sets that you would not use to evaluate a growth fault, but they are used to find other normal faults deeper, like in petroleum exploration. So effectively what they did was they found another fault, and you mentioned the word wrench fault earlier. That's basically what this is probably a normal fault, could be a wrench fault, different strike, different dip, but it's literally in the Paleozoic rocks, which are the shales that the oil and gas industry is targeting. So that may be of use to them, but it's way below the aquifers that we're concerned about, where the growth fault we identified. So the state doesn't dispute this new growth fault that EPA identified, but it's just kind of irrelevant to the environmental concerns that the state has in the Cenozoic aquifers. So
And the way that that was left after this report was that the state commented.
state commented, and so they revised it, but the point is that that Paleozoic fault does not exclude the possibility of the shallower Cenozoic growth fault, and that's what we think is important to identify or further evaluate.
so I can have someone from EPA come. And then if you wanted a copy, you could get one. I can send it to Brian, and then she can distribute that. And then the state's comments, I'll find those and we can put them all together.
The other option is to put it on EPA's website. It was on there and then it was taken down. We could put it back up. So
We could circulate them.
I'll check.
But I think that the important thing is that we want to know if the growth fault that the state found has been evaluated, and it sounds like it hasn't.
No, it has. That's exactly what that report was. And we've had other entities, Sarah with different ways has looked at it. So that's what she can share with you next week or in next month. There's more than just that report.
So it sounds like if there are differing opinions about it, I'd really like to hear both sides talk about it.
Yeah. Yes, that's what I was gonna suggest. So it sounds to me like that's the status, is that there's disagreements from,
It's
you know,
not disagreements, it's just different.
or different understandings, I guess. Different understandings about that the existence or implications of different geologic formations into growth fault, and that, you know, of all the priorities, I guess my question for all of you, when we were talking about the August meeting, is that I know that the question of a growth fault has come up since, you know, I've been talking with all of you. I know it's been a person, you know, it's a big.
Since the Cenozoic.
Since the Cenozoic era. And so I guess it seems to me like it would be an interesting conversation. But it's something that probably EPA and the state would need to frame up so that they can figure out how they want to have this conversation, because it's a live, real conversation. So I don't know if that's something that could happen in August, but it sounds to me like it's of interest.
So I have to clarify why we asked for this meeting. We really asked for this meeting because we were wondering about the effects on the chemicals, whether they're inside the pits, gone from the pits, wherever they are. The question was, if they frack under the site, is that going to have an impact? If they will inject within so many miles within the site, is that going to have an effect? How do we know what's going to happen with these chemicals? We're so unsure now. Because when you were talking earlier about how they did the pits, there was one pit that never would fill up, and they never knew where it was going. And that's scary. And no one's ever investigated that. And so here we're talking now that we're going to have all this. We've got a drilling pad supposed to be right across the road from us. We know there's sand lenses. We know there's fractures under the pits. We know the chemicals have moved. is there any protection to keep that site from being more drastically impacted than it already is? And that was my question. Is it just sitting there and open to anybody that wants to do something?
And as far as the state's concerned, the commission is going to do their job and they're going to do the engineering evaluation, which the health department is incapable of doing. We don't have the credentials or the experience to do that. But I did read some of your slides, Stuart, and also the other handout. Financial assurance is a big part of this process. And so I believe that the commission, if they believe there's any chance of problems happening, they would want to work that into the financial assurance equation. But my guess is their engineering analysis is going to say, no, this seems very improbable that something would happen. If I was a company doing anything around the site, I would be very careful, because if you mess this up, you could be on the hook. And there's lots of hooks out there related to this Superfund
I think that's
site.
another reason that this meeting was important tonight, because we're going to need people to understand our concerns, because it's not well known. And when you ask Denver about it, they'll say, no problem. But we feel differently. And so we'd kind of like you to understand what our concerns are, and that there's already sand lenses and fractures out there, and there's all kinds of issues going on out there, and the chemicals have already been moved outside of the pits. Where they're going, I don't know. But with the white paper that the state put out, there's argument back and forth, we still don't know where that stands. I really don't understand what one side is saying, no, it's not there. The other side is saying, well, we've identified it, needs to be investigated further. Nobody wants to put any money into it. And we're worried about this. And so that's why this meeting is so important tonight. These are our concerns. And we kind of wanted a discussion about what our concerns are with these kids.
I think, Bonnie, we also understand that they're gonna pull 48 holes in the ground right at the end. What we see is what's claimed to be the end of the plume. We don't know if that's the end of the plume. We really don't know. But they're gonna poke 48 holes in the ground. And what does that mean if there's stuff that they're drilling through that's got toxins in it?
Those are all questions that we really need to understand. And the site, as best people can, they want it out of sight and out of mind. But it's in our sight, it's in our minds, and we need these questions to be discussed. And so that's why we asked for this meeting. And I've really enjoyed everything that you all presented, because it's excellent. Learned a lot, really appreciate it. And I guess our goal is to get you all to be available if we need to call and say, hey, here's an issue we'd like you to look at. Is that a possibility?
Good for you.
Yeah, I'm so glad to know that. You can have another cookie.
So
Otherwise, you're gonna
I
get it.
guess my question to EPA is, why would you not run a couple seismic lines like the health department is wanting to know further about that roof wall?
And Richard, I think that is the kind of question that we need to reserve and should reserve for this, a properly framed conversation.
Okay.
That really, we should have Sarah here and we should have some time. But it seems to me like, of the two things you just said, Bonnie, one was making sure that folks at the state and the county really understand the concerns and it's on people's radar, which I think it is, and having heard from them as well. And then the second piece is having this conversation about the growth ball. That really involves CDPHE and EPA, and just to hear what it is that the different perspectives. Okay, so will you hold your question? I'm sure there'll be more of them.
For the next meeting.
Or whenever we do it.
No, the next meeting, we got the reports ready.
We'll see.
Oh.
I can't.
We hope.
Promise that, because there's review that has to be done, and some of it CDPHE hasn't even.
So
I haven't received, then CDPHE gets it next, and then it goes to the committee.
So that could be a backup in case you don't get that.
So let's talk about the August meeting before we break.
Had her hand up for a moment.
Sonia, sorry, I missed you.
I was just wondering, just given that, when I spoke with, is it Bob Kohler at COGCC? He wasn't aware of any growth fault. And I said, well, I would think it appeared in a white paper for the CDPHE. So that concerned me, that there wasn't that awareness. So I want to make sure that that white paper makes its way to COGCC and to the USGS as well. And for further
USGS
input.
actually reviewed the draft version of this document.
Okay, but he didn't see it on his list.
Oh, not everybody from USGS has seen it, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, USGS was EPA's contractor reviewing the
Right.
white paper draft, so.
I have,
Sean
a-
gave me Lee's card, so
Yeah.
Lee,
Yeah.
you probably expect a call.
Sure, no problem.
So that was why I was concerned that it all get amalgamated, but just given the evolving state of knowledge regarding induced seismicity, I wonder if COGCC or I wonder if CDPHE, Oil and Gas Division, might consider putting out a call for additional such white papers that might be hidden in, academic nooks and crannies. But now they're very relevant, so all the available information needs to come forward.
Well, there's I can't quite remember their real name, but the Colorado Seismology Association or Committee or whatever they're called. We participate with that group. They've met, they meet periodically, and we've engaged with them. University of Colorado, Colorado State, Rick Alister out of Colorado State, and there's a couple folks at School of Mines, and several, there are, shockingly enough, a couple people, they mostly do work in California, but they're with engineering firms here in Colorado. So we engage with them. The reality is most of these induced seismicity events are not happening in Colorado. So in fact, Ann Sheehan was just renewed her stations. She was paying for them. They were here for since the Greeley event of 2014, I want to say, and she's just pulled them because there's just not enough induced seismicity event for her to spend her money on. So she's moved them over to Oklahoma where there's a lot of action. She can write her, she's got a big grant, several $1 million grant, studying induced seismicity here in Colorado and Oklahoma. So, so there are things being done here.
I'm wondering if, in terms of, just to wrap up the follow-up, in terms of sharing efforts that are underway to study induced seismicity in Colorado, that's something that there could be some follow-up on that. But I am keeping track of the notes, many of the things that you mentioned. I think, Sonia, you're also going to share the article with Stuart. Yeah, Tom. And then we were.
COGC
I don't want
is, you just heard that there's, the CDPHE has evidence of a fault, a growth fault. That is questionable as whether or not it's been fully evaluated. And a request by CDP from the state saying it should be fully and more evaluated. You've heard that there was a pit that kept draining away to that, we don't know where. And so maybe that's default or some other fault. And you're putting very close to the plan is to put both wells close to both the plume and close to within 5 miles an injection site that could affect the site where you got 38 million gallons of toxic waste that when it's released is going to cause a big problem. Are you concerned about adjusting your rules and regulations to create more safety regulations around the site so that, that you don't end up with an earthquake that's gonna, or some other thing that's caused by those drilling, that's gonna, cause the site to fall apart and release what it's got. Or you just say that all your regulations right now are adequate, just to make sure the site's gonna be safe. You've got a big concern because of that 138 million gallons of toxic waste.
What I can say is we do review and we'll take a look. I need to engage with Lee to get more understanding of this growth fault. What I don't understand, what I would like to know is the mechanism by which this fault originated. I'd like to get an understanding. Most growth faults that I'm aware of are basically sediment.
Right.
Is broadly what they occur.
It's syndepositional, it's happening during deposition.
Yeah, so, and whether this is that I don't know if this is active or not.
It's not,
Okay, so that.
and it's shallow.
That puts a perspective on it.
Yes.
So, so there's that piece of the puzzle. But all of these things are things that we need to walk through and understand and be able to get those assurances that you're basically presenting. And then we also, engineering is, in engineering, we, have safety factors. You say, I'm gonna build this building, I've got this amount of load on the building, and we put a safety factor on things. So that's what we do in our review. We put a review. So we talked earlier about this quarter-mile radius. Well, that gives me a number of radius of influence away. So I typically want to make sure we're at least a mile or more away from something before I'm going to say that, hey, this is not an impactful. So those are the kinds of things we'll need to walk through the review process and get our comfort factor before we go forward.
Okay, well, that's what I'm asking, and at the same time, remembering that your stakes are much higher because that's 138 million gallons of toxic waste there. And so maybe even a better safety factor might be considered for that one area.
Noted.
And not to be nitpicky, but I've heard within 5 miles, and we've measured from where the surface hole is, it's about 6.5 miles. And from the bottom of the hole,
The directional hole.
the bottom of the directional hole that angles towards the Superfund site, it's 5.77 miles away from the very outer part of the former Lowry landfill boundary. Not that it makes all that much difference, but it is not accurate to say within 5 miles.
But to make your case too, I mean, the point is all those distance and everything, you're gonna measure seismicity and seismic activity. And if you have any, you're gonna shut it in, is my opinion.
Exactly. And Diana gave me a note, and one of the last little slides on there is what's called the traffic light. So that's one of the things we do, and it's about 6 or 7 types of way to measure. We all talk earthquakes in magnitude, but a seismologist talks about peak acceleration, peak velocity. Those are more numeric calculations. But then there's the qualitative. In there, there's the, and if you look at USGS, they have it, the did you feel it? And then there's the Mercalli scale, which a guy by the name of Mercalli really tried to combine those two, where he interviewed a whole lot of people, and his scale is, and he correlated it back to the magnitude scale. Did the pictures on your wall shake? Did the china fall off? Did this, and he escalated it up. And he interviewed people in different levels of magnitude event. And so there's a Mercalli scale. So this traffic light study, we apply that here in Colorado. And roughly speak, and that's why we put the seismometer on the location. And we use 2.5 magnitude. That's also the published data on the USGS website is at 2.5 or greater. Actually, here in Colorado, due to Ann Sheehan and the fact that they're right here in Colorado, she's got them publishing in Colorado, anything that's 2 magnitude or more. And another interesting fact is the event in Greeley recently was a 3.2, and then there was a 2.6, and then of course things dropped off because of our mitigation. But people felt the 3.2. People did not feel or respond on the 2.6. It's kind of an interesting correlation. They found 6 events that they published. So that's where we get our 2.5 magnitude. And that's really, if you have a 2.5 magnitude event within 2.5 magnitude, we're going to apply the green light. We're going to throw you into the caution. You need to shut in, you need to figure out what's going on.
So I'm gonna, again, interrupt this there only because there's a wealth of discussion that needs to happen. There's a lot of follow-up. I sense it needs to happen probably, and we may, it sounds like, I'm sure that the CAG members will be having follow-up on this, but I think in terms of Lowry in particular as well. Do you all mind if we just spend the last 5 minutes here? I think my sense is for August that we don't know about the reports, and if that's one option is to just focus on the reports. If they're not available, another option may be to have this conversation about the growth faults, although again, I don't know.
And I do have a suggestion, because at our meeting last week, you had talked about, are there other chemicals north of Yale besides 1,4-dioxane, and, what's the data for that? And so we could talk about that. And I did bring some, this is just one data report, but I can pull up some other things too. And if someone wanted to look at this ahead of time, I can put it on the website, and we can have a copy now too. This is a North End investigation, and it has, because you're asking for a map of where chemicals were looked for and if they were detected or not in the VOCs. So that's in this report. It's from September of 2017. So that's something we can talk about, like north of Yale, what wells were sampled, what were the chemicals that were found in them. And this could be a starting point for that. So that's one suggestion. I do have these available, and I can put it on the website too, and I can email them out.
So it sounds to me like the first priority would be the 2 reports, and if they're available. And do we know when? Is there a sense of when you'll know? Because then that's when we'll have to create it.
Second week of August.
Yeah. Okay. So
I think that's too risky.
yeah.
I think maybe we ought to focus on what we talked about before and what Bonnie has said. I'm much more interested in finishing this discussion and getting the answers to the impact that faults, et cetera, have on this chemical movement. And it's not confined to that picture that Lee showed us. I mean, we know that it's not confined there. So I'd like some greater reassurance if I can get it, or at least information. So that would be important to me. Linda, I do like the idea of your document that you just referenced it. So maybe that would be a second topic, though.
Yeah, we might be able to have both of them, or start one and finish a different day, or, because like you said, these are evolving questions too. They promote new questions that we have, and and so getting Sarah here and having her talk through some things, and Lee, who can help answer your questions and help answer the new ones that you have too.
Okay, so that would be a thing to post to Sarah in the next day or two. And I confirmed, I think that she is going to be able to be asked for the 3rd week. So I think that would be, sounds like that's probably the new top priority, unless we find out that those reports are available. In terms of follow-up from our discussion last week, I know Marty, you want to say a couple things and ask a couple questions.
Steve Wharton had told me, I thought within the next week I was going to get concise answer to the question I had asked, and I haven't seen any.
The one, so about the 5-year review protectiveness, is that the one?
Mhm.
So when,
The fact sheet.
the
fact
fact
sheet.
sheet.
That was the one where
The-
Marty asked
The question I asked in May, on May 17th or 16th or whatever it was, and I didn't need the 4-page reply. I just wanted a concise 1-paragraph response, and Steve said he would get that.
He was in meetings offsite all week. Can you give me the exact wording of the question so we can make sure we answer it?
I will send it back to you. You emailed it to me yesterday, so I can email it back to you if you like.
Yeah, after the meeting, I'm happy to sit down also with the two of you and make sure that we know.
Yeah, let's do that.
And I recall a bit of the conversation, so
Right.
and we'll make sure that there's a time frame for getting you your answer.
Thank you.
Okay, fine, yeah.
So I'm not sure what this update, work session was. Are we just supposed to say we had this meeting, but I've got 2 issues. The same as Marty. Steve Wharton said that he would put something together and let me know how Dietrich and Bill or McGinnis and Associates would be included in the technical meetings. And I haven't heard anything, so that's the number 1 issue. The second issue is we've got a big hearing coming up on the Menard development again. And at the meeting, Steve Wharton told us that EPA under Superfund law cannot tell a developer whether to move forward or not move forward on development. However, it's my understanding that Lennar is now saying EPA said it'd be okay to go ahead if they put in the radon collection systems in each of the houses. And so that kind of contradicts itself. And I have a feeling that may be what we're going to hear at our next meeting, because they say they have new information. And I think that may be it. And if that's it, I'd like to know how we amend that.
Part of that problem is because that letter went out from the WSDs implying that there was nothing wrong. And according to Steve, he could not comment on that letter. But by not commenting, what he's doing is he's telling the developers that the misinformation that they received is something that EPA agrees as being correct information. And so by not commenting, he is commenting, and that's not adequate.
I'm a little confused because that letter only refers, almost exclusively refers to information provided by EPA in 5-year reviews.
And then, and the 5-year review was not the last 5 years, not 2017, but the 2000. It was the 5-year review, 2002, 2012. Sorry. So why emphasize the 2012 review when the most recent one is 2017?
So at the meeting last week, one of the things that came up was just what you said. And I think the question for Steve is, who's not here, but I think a follow-up question is there a way that EPA can, without feeling that they're being misleading, give a clear sense that they're not actually supporting it one way or the other, or that they're not doing the thing that you're concerned is going to be characterized?
If you do this with it.
And is this something that somebody could do verbally at a hearing, or is this something that because I don't know.
They've already done it.
And one way of doing it is EPA just coming out and saying, we cannot say that it is protective because we're still under the 5-year review, or it's not, can't say it's protective. And so we cannot say one way, they can put a statement out basically saying, we cannot say one way or another whether it's going to affect your development.
All right, so I'm going to kind of back up a little bit. So on any development anywhere in the United States, EPA does not say a piece of land is safe or not safe. We rely, 1, on the local government, and then 2, on the person that wants to develop on that land to do their due diligence and investigate and find out if there are any chemicals or contamination. So that's called a phase 1, which Lennar did. Then my understanding is City of Aurora came back and said, we'd like you to do a more thorough. They did a phase 2, which is they collected their data. That's the appropriate method. EPA does not come in and say one way or the other. We do not get involved in local decisions.
If you just say that, that's important.
Yeah, and we have said-
Because,
we have said
because
to
that
City of
letter
Aurora.
implies that the
Heather
EPA
Sarah.
agrees with the letter.
So we met with EPA, myself, Sarah, and Dr. Beery, met with City of Aurora back in February, and that's what we conveyed to them. And Karen Hancock was there, that we don't have any information about that particular piece of land. And even if we did, we would not come out and say one way or the other. The due diligence is on the property owner to do their.
Why can't you put that in writing?
Karen Hancock did write a synopsis of our conversation and sent that out. During that point in time, Dr. Beery, who has worked in California where a lot of developments went in, happened to mention to Karen Hancock and Heather that you can build your housing with these vapor barriers in general. This is just in general, not necessarily at that proposed development, to prevent radon and other vapor intrusions from coming in. So as a side note, 1,4-dioxane, it does not have a vapor intrusion hazard. There's not a standard in Colorado for that. Nationally, it would be 1,900 parts per billion if there were one. The volatility of the chemical just is such that it's not. So that was my side note on that. So EPA has not spoken directly to Lennar that I know of. It could, before my time maybe, I don't know. But we have not said that it's safe or not safe. We do not go to Aurora and tell them something unless we are asked directly from them for information, and that has not happened. And then the letter that the WSDs put together for Lennar, they were asked by Lennar to do that. I didn't see any information in there that was not actually correct. So I cannot go to City of Aurora and say that's not.
It was 7-year-old information.
Yeah, but this site's 30 years old. There's lots
Yeah,
of
but
information.
you could have an X-ray from 2012 and it won't show any cancer, but if you looked at it in 2017, you could have cancer.
All right, so that gets to why the 5-year review for 2 of the operable units, which is the shallow groundwater and the deep groundwater. There was a preferred this water, but the determination was that we're going to defer the protectiveness. That doesn't mean that the remedy's not protected, and it doesn't mean that it is protected. It means that we're just getting more information. What we were getting more information on was the wells that were near the plume along Jewel to make sure that those were free of chemicals of concern. That has happened. There were a couple abandoned wells in that area that needed to be verified that they were abandoned. That has happened. And then the last part is how deep does the actual plume go vertically? The horizontal extent EPA felt was fairly characterized correctly. So that's why these nested wells went in. So that does not affect that proposed development, this deferred protectiveness. And we have not found any other chemicals north of Yale that brings us to any concern. So that's what that means.
Yeah, and so stepping back, my sense is that part of what's happening here is kind of the same thing that was happening when EPA was using the terms non-detect. It was that there's a technical response being given that EPA feels is technically accurate, that I think that folks from the community are saying, we're concerned this is going to give the wrong impression. And we're concerned that this is going to give an impression that EPA supports this, even if, so I think the question, and this is my sense that as one of the things we talked about at the meeting, was that even if technically what you're saying you stand behind and is not running afoul of anything, that from a community on the ground perspective, there are some concerns. And it raises, both concerns about feeling like EPA is is hearing, I think, but also a concern about just what the city and what the developer is going to hear. So I think that this is really, it's not necessarily a question, I mean, there's big questions that are substantive and technical, but in this case, to me, this is a question of, is there something that can be done that EPA feels, has, it doesn't run afoul of your, what you do and how you behave in development issues, and doesn't get out of your zone, but also that the community feels is helpful. Yes.
If the section of the latest 5-year review fact sheet were simply written verbatim, that would answer my question that I asked for.
That was in that letter.
So
It was, it's 4 pages.
So
And all I wanted was the paragraph.
and your letter, that the request you made back in May is directly related to this one question. So I wonder if killing 2 birds with 1 stone could be a statement along the lines of what you thought you heard Steve saying he could do. That, but I think the issue was it has to be something that EPA feels is, I remember him saying, if I worded it this way, I think I could live with that. That would make me feel like it would have integrity and would be. So I think that one of the questions is, can we talk with Steve about a 1-sentence, 2-sentence response that could not get out of EPA's lane, have integrity technically, and still, and basically be a response to your question. So I think all 3, if it could accomplish all 3 things, which I think probably is possible, threading the needle, that would be a killing is my sense.
And the other thing I'm curious about is if the steering committee was going to be implemented again, because I thought several months ago it was discussed and EPA determined there was no use for it, and I'm understanding that it's back, or it's proposed to be back.
So it's not an EPA committee. It's a committee of different agencies that talk about institutional controls and development in the area. So it's not something started, it's not EPA's.
Right. I haven't heard anything since there was a.
Lynn can probably answer.
Lynn?
Lynn?
Sure. I mean, we meet with the local entities. Yes, it's part of our responsibilities as a health department. And there's statutory requirements that we work with the county on land. We do.
So because it's 8:10, Margie, and I understand that there's a question about the follow-up. There was some questions about whether the steering committee was going to be meeting. And so maybe at the next meeting, we could have just an update about that, about if the steering committee is meeting. I know that we know about this, we've talked about the steering committee in the past, but it sounds like that's a question.
Yeah.
But without, sorry, we're 10 minutes over, so I don't want to go down to this.
I'm good with that.
I'm sorry.
It's fine.
I'm sorry.
Because I'm new to this group in the last 6 months, would some history in what the steering committee is about and how it was developed? I mean,
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we had a whole meeting, and if we need to do more, we can do more, but I know enough that it's a huge can of worms. Yeah, so I don't want to even,
Well,
I don't want to even go there.
one of the things that got lost though in this is what's going to happen with our technical advisors meeting with the EPA.
So in terms
We
of.
would like
Yeah,
either an answer or a time frame for an answer.
So Steve, what I remember Steve saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, all of you were there, and Linda in particular, but I heard him say, I will have an answer for you by today, or he would have an answer about when he'll have an answer. So I'm happy to tomorrow, and then he said, keep in mind, I'm out like for the whole next week. So I'm happy, I think it's understandable we haven't heard from him, but I'm happy to contact him and say, the CAG wanted to renew its question about when you'll have a proposal for how the technical advisors will be integrated. And I think he said at the very least it will be right when those reports come out, that would be.
Yeah, that's when
that would be the first.
Right, now it's just a matter of when that would happen.
Well, here's the concern, because the rule now, when Rebecca was still here, and she said as a matter of more openness, that now instead of having everybody at the technical meetings, it's going to be EPA and WSDs, and then they're going to go to the state, and they're going to go to the community. That's our openness to us. And it used to be that we would have technical meetings as a whole, And so, like I told Steve at the meeting, we're not asking that this whole CAG be at this technical meeting. We're asking that our technical advisors be involved in the discussions. And so that's our major concern, is that our technical advisors be able to have a technical discussion. They'll report back to us.
And what I'm gonna do is for those of you who were at the meeting last week, I'm gonna write up some notes, because I had some, like, 4 big aha takeaways, insights that I just have not had a chance to write up, but I'm gonna share those with you. But this is one of the biggies, right, and it relates to the others. So I will talk to Steve, and you and I can follow up separately about how to do that, because I think that was really talked about quite a bit. And I think he did make a commitment to come back to this group with how.
Biggest point of that for us, I'm gonna make it really clear right now what our goal is. We have given EPA technical comment. Never been used, never been integrated into the discussion. And there's no sense in the community giving technical comment on this issue if it's not going to be considered. So that's the bottom line for us. How can our technical advisors be involved like they used to be involved?
I think you made that pretty clear last time too. So I'll put that in my notes, but I think Steve.
I appreciate it.
Okay, you guys, and I'm so sorry, Sonia, can you make it super brief and then we'll let
I just wanted to understand, I think.
Sorry, wait, I'm sorry, we're really over, but don't.
I think it was wonderful to have your expertise at this meeting and all the input, but I wanted to understand what the next step is. So will you be meeting with Lee and you'll be reviewing the white paper, and then you and he, or who else, what other parties, someone else with COGCC? How will there be a decision-making process as to the potential impact of this growth fault, need for further study or whatever, and how that should impact the process of application? How do you envision this?
I think I can answer step 1.
Okay.
I'll get back to the office, I'll hand Lee's card to Bob, and Bob will give you a call. Bob has a PhD in geology, so I think it'd probably be more appropriate for the two gurus to talk to each other. And
I'll have it tomorrow. It's available electronically online, so.
yeah, well, yeah, you guys can figure that piece out, and then we'll get an understanding. From there, I can only talk globally from the standpoint of as far as this injection well, it's a bit of a dance right now in the understanding of our processes and walking through our processes, the Form 2, the drilling of the hole review, the location review, and then the underground injection elements review, Arapahoe County's zoning and planning board approvals, the CD process, they're all intertwined. So the true answer to your question is very complicated.
Okay, but I was just wondering.
And Sonia, I think my suggestion is since we're so over, you all connect and report back what you hear. Lee, you'll report back to you.
I just have a point of clarification or possible correction. Wendy, you said earlier that Rocky Flats is military.
No.
Rocky Mountain Arsenal is
Federally
military, but it was Department of Energy, not military.
Oh, that's what, I'm sorry. I meant federal agencies owned by.
I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that.
Thank you. Okay, good night. See everyone.
I think you should hang on to your firewall roll.